all the books that I've written.
There we go.
Well, the ones I've written in with crayon,
And your left hand.
Well, I am left-handed.
Oh, well, that that helps. Colin, welcome. Good to see you.
Hey, Paul, thanks for inviting me today.
Sure. We're just getting started here. We'll do intros in about a minute. Dennis Hunter, good to see you again.
Thank you, sir. Pleasure being here. I'm learning more than I ever wanted to learn.
Well, that's a high bar, but thanks for coming back. Hello, Luda. I saw Tim.
Hi, Paul and everyone. Nice to be here.
Let's do a few intros. Luda, you've got the microphone. You want to introduce yourself, and then we'll do a few others?
Sure. I'm sorry, I'm off video. I'm in the car. So I am, my technical background is AI. I have been a serial entrepreneur, 3 startups, senior exec at GE. I ran a public company, and then I was a venture capital investor.
Great. Welcome.
Thank you.
David DeLallo, welcome. You want to introduce yourself, David? Oh, where'd he go? We'll go someone else. Michael Davis, welcome. You want to say hi?
Hello, everybody. How are you this evening?
Yeah. Where are you calling from, Michael?
I'm in Providence, Rhode Island. Good to see you, Paul. Good to see everybody else.
Same here.
Sorry,
We'll go back to David. Yeah, David, you want to introduce yourself? There you are.
technical difficulties. I am David DeLallo. I am a tech editor and writer and AI analyst. Previous lives, I was at McKinsey, leading their AI thought leadership, IBM for 3, working on Watson thought, and yeah, happy to be here with everyone.
Well, good. Welcome. Deanna, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. I'm Dina and in the San Francisco Bay Area in San Jose. And I'm a Scrum Master and focusing in on a product owner, focusing on how we can use AI to within the Agile process.
Oh, and what are you learning? Is it fit in or not?
Definitely doing a little bit more, trying to do some investigation and seeing how writing user stories and stuff like that, and how we can use possibly building out the backlog. I haven't gotten that far, but yeah.
Yeah, user stories seem like a great use case. Robert Murray, you want to say hi and introduce yourself?
Okay. So I'm the non-techie of the group here. I actually train coaches on the use of AI. I've been using it since December of last year. And then I started getting into it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to completely change the world of coaching. And if people don't get on board, they're going to get left behind. So I've been geeking out, and I've come up with lots of innovative, useful ways to put content out in the world and help create more transformation for people who are trying to bring connection to the world.
That's great. And Robert, what are your 2 best use cases or most common ones or favorite?
The absolute favorite for me is taking 2-hour-long transcripts of coaching calls, dropping it into Claude. Now we also can with ChatGPT when they went to Turbo and increased their input model. But basically asking it to summarize, and not just summarize the key points, but look for the action items, look for the future opportunities for coaching, write custom emails to the client, and then have it go back and analyze how I could have done a better job as a coach, how I could have asked better questions, follow-up questions, next steps for the client, the things, and then create kind of a running log. So basically creating a much more powerful journey. So that's one. The other one that's blowing me away right now is we got a tool called Search.io, which creates a large language model of just our content. We have 300 hours of training for coaches. So we put all of it into it, and it created a wisdom chatbot, which is basically a sandboxed large language model tied to GPT-4 with exactly our content. But
Yep.
not only does it provide an answer, but it also provides a direct link to the video at the exact point in our training. So like those are the two things I've been, enjoying the most, but there's lots others.
That's helpful, Robert. Do you mind just sharing in the link, the name of that product you said, and you put your 300 hours in? I didn't hear
Oh,
it.
yeah, absolutely. I'll drop it in.
And the last thing the asking it critique itself is a really great use case. When it does, do you find the feedback useful or vanilla or?
No, unbelievably useful. So I asked it to analyze my sales ability. Like coaches usually they have strategy sessions to get people to enroll in something. And I said, what are some of the top ways that I could do a better job of being a salesperson? And then I ran it by a friend who taught sales. And she's like, oh my God, it got the #1 way of getting sales that nobody teaches, which is to tie them joining your program with their identity shift. Like do you want to be the kind of person who can accomplish these things? She says that's one of the keys to sales, and that nobody teaches that. And Claude in this case came up with that as one of the suggestions for improved sales in the future.
That's great. Does anybody want to share their experience? We had so many new models come out in the last week. So we had Gemini from Google, we had Q from Amazon, we had Grok from Twitter, we had a torrent URL from Mistral. Does anyone want to quickly share any of those that they tried and liked or hated? A lot of busy people. Well, if you do, we'll come up and we'll do it on the open mic here. So let's go ahead and get started. My name is Paul Beyer, and we have an organization called GAI Insights. We help companies figure out how to use Gen AI. We focus really on practical use cases for business. We don't focus on consumer or the ethical issues, although those are certainly important. We collaborate a lot. Our centerpieces are these weekly learning labs, which we started in February and continue to have a great following, and it's been a great part of my week. And yearly conference. We have 7 AI analysts now, and that continues to grow, and really appreciate everyone's contribution in making this community continuing growing and a part of a learning situation. If you want to be on a Google Calendar, let me know. I can add you there. Some people prefer that. If you haven't seen it, we released our corporate buyer's guide to large language models, and that's gotten a lot of great feedback. It is a fee-based subscription for $2,000, but it certainly will save you many hours if you're in the process of building your business case or evaluating different models. WINS framework is one of the ones that John and I and others developed. That was in the Harvard Business Review. It's words, images, numbers, and sounds, WINS. And if your work is involved in those aspects and it's highly digitized, you are in what we call in the crucible. So companies and software, legal firms, financial services, education, curriculum development, these guys are all going through massive changes now and have huge opportunities and threats coming up in our view in the next few years. We continue to hear of how hard it is to keep up. Our 7 analysts now have been on this beta program for the last 3 or 4 weeks, or each morning at 7:30. We look at the top 5 articles that one of our researchers in India finds, and then we rate it EIO, essential, important, or optional. And the target user is an AI executive, business or technical side, or an investor. And it's been a great discussion and debate internally on how to rate these things. And those videos are on YouTube. And we're also experimenting with email summary. So if you'd like to be part of that, let me know. We can get you hooked up and give us some feedback. We have Tyler is going to be speaking December 21st in a LinkedIn Live event. He's an example, amazing example of really doing some innovative stuff. and they had a Gen AI innovation initiative that was taking ideas for their brand from their whole community. And Tyler submitted that, won it, is now called a Coca-Cola artist, and has got a great story on how Gen AI is really transforming the whole creative space. End of January, we have another use case. This is Doug's going to walk through why they looked at multiple models and chose custom GPT, which is the name of a company and a product, to build a knowledge base for their particular application. No learning lab the week of Christmas and New Year's, so one more this year. It'll be our last one this year. Wow. Conference next year, 7th to 8th, that's all locked and loaded. Conference contracts are signed, so we're going to start building up that certainly part of in January. And tonight, really excited to have Colin join us. Colin, I'll let you introduce yourself, but one of the things that we continue to look for is who's actually using this technology, not in proof of concept, not in kind of little development tests, but actually environment. And when we ask those questions, who's in production, you kind of go from 100% down to 5 or 6%. So that's one. Second is we've seen in our anecdotal evidence, probably large companies in general, probably most software companies, probably 90-95% have gone with OpenAI. Part of it was availability. Part of it was the safe choice. We know 2 companies that the technical team wanted to go with Claude, another one to use Llama 2, but they didn't want to take it upstairs to the executives because executives are getting so much pressure to use the brand or the known brand. But we know there's an explosion going on with all the new capabilities in open source. And Mistral is one of them. They've raised a ton of money. They got a really quality team. They're based in Paris. So Mistral and a company in Germany and AI21 from Israel are 3 companies over in Europe. They're really making a push to be the OpenAI of Europe. So there's a whole bunch of regulations going over there. There's a whole bunch of companies who want to work with companies that are more indigenous to Europe and have data over there. And they're one exciting it. But Colin, introduce yourself and tell us a story of how you ended up using this technology and why you chose it.
Yeah, terrific. Well, thanks for inviting me, Paul. It's a pleasure to be here. Colin Gowden, CEO here at VIA. My background is 31 years now in technology, originally with IBM, and then I had 2 startups, one in the 1990s that grew and sold, and then another one in the mid-2000s, both successful. I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, so close to Harvard and MIT, where I had the opportunity to be a board director and advisor to 3 MIT spinouts and 1 Harvard spinout. It's actually how I met Paul at MIT, actually, at judging some competition, I want to say was it earlier this year, last year?
It seems like ages ago.
Yeah. It does seem like ages ago. I guess it can't be last year, right? It couldn't have been because it was AI oriented. So amazing how quickly time passes. Had the opportunity in 2016 to found VIA with a few folks that I've worked with for, some of us have worked together for 20 plus years at different companies. We founded VIA with a mission. Actually, can I share a few slides and then would you like me to just do slides and then a demo, or how would you like this to work?
I think a few slides and a demo, and take some questions would be great, Colin.
Perfect. So let me see if I can start out here. Let me know if you can see my screen.
We can see it now.
Great. So I'd say, we started VIA with a mission around cleaner, safer, more equitable communities. So technically, I always point this out, our goal wasn't to be either an AI company, a blockchain company, a specific kind of tech company. Our goal was, we all came from technology backgrounds, but to do something that would help enable communities to be cleaner, safer, more equitable. We started in the area of applying AI back in 2016, 17, and we quickly found it didn't matter how good our math or AI was if we couldn't get access to the data. Data was often too restricted, too tightly held, prohibited for whatever reason for it to be usable or useful in lots of enterprise contexts. And so we started to develop a platform that would enable data to be private and secure, but also usable and manage that through digital means. That's grown where Now we have customers in defense, energy, and transportation. Those things are all kind of related too, as you can imagine. I won't belabor the point about that. Particularly, Paul had asked me to join today to show a little bit about what we're doing with the Department of Defense. The history there is that we had originally, our goal was about data privacy, and all the backend stuff related to data. And then we left the visualization piece to lots of visualization tools that already existed. So things like Tableau, etc. As we started to work more with Air Force, Space Force, Navy, and then one of the three-letter intelligence agencies, what became evident is that actually a lot of the common visualization tools are fine for unclassified or unsecured data, or up to a certain level, but then at a high level of classification, it's actually not helpful. Like, you can't use those tools. They don't have the security, they don't pass the vulnerability tests. And so we ended up thinking about, well, how do we solve for that? And we developed an application based around, well, very recently, but now in production over the course of this year, with the Department of Defense, that actually shows how you can use AI models, generative AI and LLMs, without sharing the data. It has some restrictions on it, but we'll be happy to sort of share what we're doing in that area. And I guess the only, key things you'd say, AI doesn't matter if you can't access the data. So that's essentially what we're solving for. We call our specific applications SLAM AI, share less, ask more. And the things we were trying to solve for around our application or in this area was the data privacy piece. So how can you ensure that the data is always safe and secure? And the easiest way to make sure that your data is safe is don't send it to the model. So that's what we're going to demo a little bit of today. Second thing is, for all of you who've been following the space, this, reducing hallucinations, how can you be sort of consistent in the responses? So that's a second thing we were trying to solve for. And then the third is around the cybersecurity and IP issues. So how can I be sure that this application will pass certain classification levels? And how do I know that the IP, when I get something back from a model, it's not plagiarized, it's not infringing on some copyright, it's not actually been, manipulated in some way. I have the ownership rights, and I feel secure about it. So we'll talk. I'll maybe now I can pause and take a few questions here, but I was the next step was I was going to show a quick demo, if that's of what we've been doing here, if that's helpful.
Let's grab a few questions, Colin, before you jump in the done. Any
Sure.
clarification questions, probably? Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, this is great, Colin. Thank you. So I'm just curious, was this a LLM you built yourself, or did you base it off OpenAI, or what did you use?
Great question. We use a completely open source model. Today we're using Mistral as our model. We started with actually, first in our prototyping phase, we started with GPT-3 and 3.5 because we didn't know if it was going to work. And then as we moved to, as the open source models started to get better and better, we moved to open source models, Llama 2, and then more recently, Mistral. Our point of view is that two or three things. One is the models are getting better every week, in which case it doesn't make sense for us to try and build our own model or train or even tune our own model. We should take the best models that are out there and make a sort of a package that can leverage whatever the best model is than trying to build our own or tune one. A second is we had a requirement, necessity being the mother of invention. We had a requirement from the DoD, which was that at the highest level of sort of as the security levels go up, turns out you don't have access to GPUs. And in a world without GPUs, you can't use some of the big 70 billion parameter models. We had to move to the smaller, either quantized models or 7B, models. And then the third is lots of private environments also in the DoD where I may not have internet access. So I can't just say, oh, I'm just going to go use GPT, or I'm just going to go out to the open internet. So we had a restriction around that. And another reason I use sort of open source models that we could bring into an environment. Sorry, does that help answer your question?
Great.
Yes,
Thanks,
thank
Mike.
you.
Any other question before we go to demo? Troy, you raising your hand? Go ahead, Troy.
Yeah, I just have a question. There might be a good prelude to your slides as well. Are you going to be using the models, and is this going to be a retrieval augmented generation kind of world where you have your own vector DB that's going to be augmenting that, your visual source or Llama or GPT?
Can I answer that in the demo, actually? Because I think that will help that.
Perfect.
It's
Okay.
it's a good question. It's a good question.
Right.
Right? We
Let's
don't
go.
use a vector DB at this time, although that's not a reason we can't. It's just, at this time it wasn't necessary, but I'll explain why in a second.
Let's do one
right,
quick
thank
one
you.
for Donovan, and then before we do demo. Go ahead, Donovan.
I was just going to quick ask, do you have any opinion on the security of Orca? I've heard really good things about it. Orca and Wizard kind of are the leading LLMs now.
I don't, other than, all of the, we have a point of view around the models. First, we start by looking at where it's, what was the origin of the models, right? And then we try to have some traceability, scan the model, like, so at every point in time. And then the other is we'll show here is, you actually, if in certain circumstances, you don't have to care about it. And I'll show why in a second, where if you don't really have to worry you don't have to worry about that. You may have to worry about other things, but you don't have to, you may worry about how much memory it uses, or, how much it costs. Like, there are other things, but you don't have to worry about it stealing stuff if you orchestrate the rest of your workflow correctly. So,
Okay.
let me, other questions?
Let's jump to demo, Colin. Thank you.
Okay, great. So here I have a little video demo here. This is as I mentioned, and Paul knows, is a live application. This, for your purposes, the data, all this data is all faked and simulated because I can't show you real data, and because it's on a .mil network, it's not on a open network. But here I'll demo a little bit of this, which is the first thing you'll know. The Ask Jarvis term, by the way, that's the Air Force wanted that name, not us. So that's why it's called that. And I'm happy they paid for it, so they can call it whatever they like. What you'll notice is sort of it's a web-based interface, right? Super simple. It's easier to get ATO, or it's easier to, check code if it's, the simpler the application. So super simple interface. There are 3 frames in this web browser. So on the left-hand side, what you see is the visualization of the answers or responses coming back from the model. On the bottom is a place to, the prompt, right? Where do you enter as a user? Where do you enter your prompts? And then on the right-hand side, it's a little bit behind the scenes. You get to see here, like, what's actually happening, and I'll explain more, which helps explain like how it works. So I'd say, the starting point is here, in this particular instance, this application is for a lieutenant who may be in the civil engineering group, who is working at a Air Force base. In this case, they work at Travis Air Force Base, which is out of California. And they say, hey, show me all the buildings on Travis Air Force Base that have a heating and ventilation air conditioning system where, on a scale of 1 to 100, the condition is less than 60. So it's not in great condition. Now, in the regular world, what you would do, or in a, traditional LLM model, what you might do is send package up the data, and you'd send it to the LLM and ask it at this question. What we do here is, instead of, we have some prompt engineering behind the scenes, and we actually intercept the message, and what we say to the model is, here's a prompt from a user. Do not answer this prompt. Instead, what I want you to do is give me instructions on how you would answer this prompt in 2 formats. First, in a SQL query, right? Given some structure of database, how would you write the query that would retrieve the answer here? And second, visualize it, and visualize it in a specific language. We use Vega-like 5.3 because it turns out like that's entirely open source, and there's some other things. But by asking it to the model to render the results in a specific, or to provide the code back in a specific language, we know that we can always render the graphic accurately, and so that's helpful from our standpoint. So what we do is, as I said, when you enter this text, what you get back is not the answer to show. You don't get the buildings. What you get is, here's the code, here's how you should query it, and then you get the SQL query, right, of how that works, and then you get some code, I'll show that in a second, that basically we render. We execute that code locally, so the data didn't go to the model. We just ask it for instructions. We execute those instructions locally and then with that, we can provide the answer locally without ever having sent it to the model. And then we have, we can render, this is an example. Here's a satellite image, and we can make automate the rollovers, right, to be able to do that. And then you can ask the model to do all kinds of things related to visualization. So for example, make the buildings red as an example, so, you can plot graphs, you can do all kinds of stuff with it, but the key is that no data went to the model itself. I have another half to this, like I promise not that much more, but a little bit more to this, down maybe 1/3, but maybe I'll pause. This is before I move to the second part. Maybe I'll pause here for questions. And this gets to your question. I think it was earlier around do we have a vector database that then we send it, that we package up early on? And what we actually do is use something called cognitive search initially, which goes through, when we get this particular prompt, we go through the data set, the table structure, and the columns and to column headings to pull out what are the most likely relationships and column headings that exist, and tables. And then we send that subset as metadata as part of the query. And we force the model to say, make your query, but choose it only from this subset, which helps reduce hallucinations, etc. And that leads to the one limitation, or the limitation here is, it runs pretty fast. It runs on CPUs, which is nice for lots of reasons, but also this is really designed for structured data where SQL is kind of the way that you would get at it, and two, for the rendering these visualizations, it's meant to visualize data. So if you wanted to write an essay, or I heard the example, give it some text and have it return a summary or better questions, like that's not what this is designed for. It's designed for structured data and returning visualizations or visual answers or responses. So let me pause there before I get to the second half.
Bob, thanks for raising your digital hand. Go ahead, Bob.
Can you hear me, Paul?
Yeah, we can barely hear you.
How about now?
Oh, much better. Much better. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Colin, thank you. Two quick questions, I hope. One is, if I understand you correctly, GPUs are forbidden to be used in security applications?
It's not forbidden. It's just they're not really available. And certainly the lines aren't available. It's not forbidden, but it's just not,
And secondly, you sort of started answering this question, but maybe you could be a little bit more complete about it. What is it that you're actually using the model for? I mean, I think it's brilliant that you're intercepting the prompt, and I understand what you're doing around it and that sort of thing, using external tools and keeping it local in that. But what portions of what the services you're providing actually use the language model?
The language model is used for two parts. One is this SQL query. So this is written by the model. And then the second is the code that makes this visualization. So it's a nice segue if you go to the, say, for example, I'm going to flip ahead, flip ahead, flip ahead. So here I have some bar graph. There's a little button. When you push it, you can actually see the code that gets written. This code is written by the model. So it's not written by a person. And that's what we're using the models for. Is that
Colin, if I say it differently, it's almost like I've got a SQL expert next to me. I ask this person what it is. It tells me the SQL, and then I put it in my secure data query.
I mean, that sort of reminds me of what code interpret is all about, right? Because you essentially do a portion of it, although sometimes the reliability isn't quite there, the conversion from natural language to the commands, right? So I'm presuming you have to review what the model is telling you in terms of the code to execute, the SQL code to
Yeah.
execute.
Two things, I think, two or three. So first is, it is like having a little bit like Copilot for a SQL expert and also a visualization person, right? Because the SQL person can't do the maps, right? The rollovers or charts, right? So it's like having two different experts, but exactly that's correct. That it's a Copilot on those elements. Second is, you're right that if you try to extrapolate and make this completely general for a Copilot, for example, you can run into this issue where you have hallucinations, or you have this issue of you have to quality control very, very carefully, partly by LLMs get very if you can dramatically increase, right, the accuracy by doing sort of some simple things. So for example, we actually have ahead of time, let me just quick thing. So for example, when this prompt, we actually run 4 or 5 different queries before this one gets sent through. So the first thing we ask is, hey, show me that. We send this quote through to the model and we say, hey, is this query, this prompt related to the previous prompt, or is it a brand new thing, right? And then there's a tree structure depending on the answer. Hey, go and, is this related to, going to be visualizing a map, or is it going to is it a graph? And depending on the answer, then there's another tree structure. So there's a little pattern here of how to improve the accuracy. Because it's, we've designed it around this idea of, hey, I have some structure. I want to, I know I want to get great results in this environment in structured data. The other thing is, as it gets run, we're able to give additional instructions. We say, instead of trying to make up an answer, only pick from this subset of possible answers, because we did this cognitive search piece first to look at the right table names, the right column names. So you can imagine a gigantic database. Actually, if I go back to the what you're supposed to do is, what the query comes back and says, oh, look at HVAC condition, right? System condition. So you can imagine that there's no database. The odds that the database has a column that says HVAC system condition is probably not very high. Probably whoever invented that database doesn't have that column, or didn't think of it that was the thing to call it. Maybe it was just AC system condition, or maybe it was AC syscond, or maybe it was just, AC, like we don't. And actually, as it turns out, in this case, it's just called current condition. So the thing we do ahead of time is be able to go through and limit the answers that the model has to look, or limit the possibilities, and that way you get a higher probability of success when you actually run it. I know that was a lot. I have like 2 more things, but basically, is that helpful as well?
That was
That's
great.
great.
Thank you.
Colin, we got 4 questions here. Let's rip through the questions and we'll finish up the presentation. Go ahead, Tim. Then we'll go to Donovan.
Hi, this is great. I have a couple of quick questions. Are you running the model internal, just inside your network, the model itself in the .mil space?
Great question. So the advantage of not having to send the data is that the model can run in anywhere. So you can choose. This was a thing. This is sort of a flexibility. If you want to run the model close, if you have the compute, right, and you want to run the model closer to your environment, and then you can do that. If you want to run the model in a different network, or have it hosted someplace, you can do that too. So basically, it's a great option, right? Which is basically, the answer is you choose what you want, and that's actually part of the flexibility. It's a nice option from that perspective.
Okay, so this is a great model in many ways, I think. But I would have a concern. I'm wondering if you've run into this. If the model is external, the model still has to know the table structure and the metadata, at least some of it.
Yep.
And the model also is going to generate some code, potentially.
it is all.
So how do you make sure, even though you've never sent the actual data, that the metadata and the code can't be effectively used by a malefactor, as they call it?
Two things there. The metadata itself, you're correct. Yeah, there's a different process around that. So we basically have there's another process which is a little text. There's probably like 13 little things, right? All in all, but one of them is in terms of sort of metadata screening. There is a little text file. It's in the kilobyte range that is that actually does screening to make sure that you're not revealing too much before it gets sent. So there's a piece related to that. But you're right. If it was completely open, you know, the metadata might reveal something. So you have to be careful about that. The other is this transparency piece, which is I get to see the code. You don't have to use the code, like you can, but you get a button, you can always see the code. And there's some nice advantages about that too, which is the way this was, you know, the mandate was, you know, the way in traditionally, if you have a lieutenant who's, you know, writing some, you know, basically putting some graph or chart together. Most often it's not for their own purposes. It's to send to their wing commander, right? Or it's to send to a general, it's to send to somebody else. And so what, you know, if you, in the real world, what would in the Tableau world or whatever, you would export this or screenshot it. And now you are revealing, when you get sent, you are revealing both the data and information. An Excel file, for example, would have the data and the chart, right? And here, when we do, there's a transfer button. When you hit transfer, only the code gets sent from one person to another. And then when they get the code, they execute it here, and then it accesses their data locally, whatever their permissions are. And the advantage, the mandate we got is, even if the Russians or Chinese intercepted the message, all they know is create a bar chart, right?
Right. I'm not right. I guess I would be concerned. I mean, you said, well, you have to be careful with the metadata. That's not acceptable to most people. You have to be careful. Well, you have to be much more specific about how you're careful, but if that may be too long an answer here. The second part about the code is, okay, if it's just short, okay, maybe. But if the person looking at it doesn't know anything about code, how do you know that it's not got something buried in it that's not obvious?
Yeah, in this case, you know, if you are in the very secure, you know, environments, you would scan the models ahead of time, and then you would have them local, right? You wouldn't put them outside on the open internet. We don't have, when I say we use open source models, and we basically, a part of our job is to scan things, make sure they're safe before they get used. So in our world, we have part of our contractual agreement is all of our code, every container has to get scanned every hour, 24/7. And if there's issues, we have 12 hours to fix it. So like there's a lot that it's not just like, oh, we picked a random model or we connect to the internet for a model. It's like that model has already been checked, right, before it gets, you know, embedded. There is a piece about that. But and you could bring it like there are like 3 or 4 different levels.
Yeah.
And,
The last thing is just I don't know if it'll help, and probably won't, having been on the other side of this, on the civil side, and done a lot of this work. The DOE has GPUs, you know, just going wasting, but it's complicated often to get access to them. But DOE is the place to go. Oak, what's it called? The one in Tennessee. But anyway, if you want,
Oak
you can
Ridge.
send me a DM.
Oak Ridge Labs with they have a high
Oak
performance
Ridge.
computing.
They have so many GPUs, they don't know what to do with them. So might be interesting to see if they could hook up.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think, you know, if you're on a aircraft carrier, right, or if there's a lot of there are lots of places where you have limited bandwidth.
Yeah. And the secure environments often just don't have network access. So
exactly, they're exactly right. So
Thanks, Tim. We'll go Donovan and Pete. Go ahead, Donovan.
Okay, quick question, hopefully. How are you drawing these maps? Are all those buildings like got their geo coordinates put in ahead of time, and you're just somehow,
so I'm not the map person, but what we do, you're right, you do have to have for, you know, for any kind of graph, chart, tables, etc., that stuff is all very standard. There's not an issue. For the map, for these satellite images, you do need shape files for the area. So that's a prerequisite. But you'd have to do that for any kind of visualization anyway. So
Okay, thank you.
Great.
sure.
Go ahead, Pete, and then Julio.
Great demo, Colin. Thanks for sharing that with all of us. I had a question, kind of building off of Tim's point around the data privacy piece here. You've created an interesting kind of novel approach here where you're not giving the end users access to the data, or that rather the model itself access to the data directly. Got two questions. In your implementation, are you feeding the schema of your underlying data store per prompt, or are you training the model on that schema as kind of step one? And then step two, I could imagine you have a number of different controls on access to that metadata schema. What's your like, do you have a general strategy around data privacy, around what the model actually gets access to and how to create access controls at that layer? I know
Okay.
those are both a little hairy.
No. Two good questions. On the first part, we definitely do not train the model at all in the schema. So we're really only providing per prompt some subset of the schema,
Sure.
for it to use. Second is this interface, something I didn't show, but basically the application, like all of our applications, basically have there's during the login process, you have this single sign-on that helps you connect to the whatever the role-based access control that you as a user have, and that's where the permissions are set for access to the database. So the model never sees database credentials or passwords, or the model doesn't know where the database is. It doesn't know how to access it. It doesn't know any of those things, right? So the browser-based application has a part of there's like multiple levels, but basically depending on how far you want to go back, but basically we don't even include the credentials in the application. We actually put it in it's all Kubernetes, so it's put in the container so that only an admin who actually installed the software really knows those credentials and is setting it up, and we're just pulling the user credentials to tie to that. So that's how permissions are set by individual. So the advantage of that is if I have, if I have only access to Travis Air Force Base, then I only see Travis Air Force Base data. But if, Paul has access to, all the bases, he gets to see all of them. But you don't have to, the model doesn't know anything about that. And actually the application doesn't know much about that either.
So that totally makes sense on the results side. Then I guess my follow-up question to that is, if you're feeding the schema per prompt, are you also controlling access to that schema based off of what that user has access to? Because you could similarly say, okay, well, Colin only has access to some subset of tables, so all intelligently on the front end only feed the prompt those schemas and kind of have an RBAC check at that level. I'm maybe too in the weeds here, but
no, that's right. I probably have some architecture diagram somewhere that could probably explain, but there is some pre-processing that's not shown here, right? That does that check about like, who's this? Do they have the right credentials? Can they ask this question? What is like, there's some other stuff that happens as well.
Awesome. Thanks for the answers. And again, these data privacy problems are really interesting in LLM. So good approach here.
Thank you.
We'll go Julio, and then we'll let him finish the presentation. Go ahead, Julio.
Okay, great. This is really interesting, Colin. I have a couple questions. I know you said you don't fine tune the models, but are you using a straight Mistral model or one that's already been fine tuned on SQL and Vega Lite or anything like that? Or I'm just surprised that a Mistral model would be good enough for this.
I want to say that so I'm not the actual model expert here, so I'm going to say, but I can get back to you to double check. But I think you're right that it may not be right out of the box. I know there are also these, I'm not going to remember the name, but basically there are ways of doing little addendums that basically are for the fine tuning around to make sure that happens, right? The SQL and the Vega Lite are good, and what we do is we have basically a set of checks that we run before we've changed models a lot of times. So every time we upgrade a model or we test a new model, it's like, oh, is this better or worse than it was on our test before. If it's better, then we can upgrade. If it's not, then we don't.
Right. Okay. And then related to that is like, do you have a feeling for how complicated a query the model or the system can handle? I mean, because a query can get pretty complicated with lots of subqueries and aggregations and things. And just because it generates valid SQL doesn't mean it's semantically correct. And then how do you check that? And how do you balance that? Or
So two things. We do check for accuracy, but we don't check for like elegance.
yeah.
And partly because like this code isn't really going to get used a lot, reused.
Mhm.
So it's not like, oh, this is somebody who's gonna like it's gonna get embedded in some code that everybody's gonna get and use over and over again. It's usually just it's the basically what we're doing is checking for here are the prototypical questions, here's the here are the answers, or here's the the results that we expect from that. But if it wasn't written in a might not be written in a most optimal way, or we basically don't control for that.
Right. Well, I don't know. I really don't know the answer to this. I'm just like wondering if there's like a scale for how complex things is. Because I can imagine somebody asking, oh, HVACs by price, by manufacturer, who haven't been serviced in 6 months, who
Yep.
store.
No, it's great because we do actually, that's exactly the kind of thing. This is like super simple, but there is exactly, hey, actually, I said, less than 60, but actually make sure that they're less that you can have the follow-on questions. Make sure that they're, only more than 10 years old. Actually, only show me the ones that are, on the west side of the base, only show me, like, you can do all of those kinds of permutations. So,
That's cool. That's really impressive. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks. So Colin, let's go 5 more minutes. If you can just touch on your second half.
Oh, I think I got most of it. We talked a little bit, which the things I was going to say is, you have this ability to, actually see the code if if you're a developer, or, you can look at it. Another advantage here is that, you can see, here it had ABF instead of Air Force AFB, right? So that's a nice little, thing that's going to happen, right? People are going to misspell, but the big, I think the interesting thing is, we did found for some folks, while it's good to go to the models, you don't have to always go to a model. So in the case where you say, yeah, I see this vertical bar chart, but actually I'd like a horizontal bar chart, instead of having to go back and ask the model to make the change, someone can just make the change in the code, and it automatically updates. And that's a nice little, you save on the compute, and you save on the network traffic, and that it's a little bit more energy efficient to go do that. So we like that approach. We enable that approach for others as well. So and then I mentioned the thing, which is the other key point is we are actually keeping an audit trail of what queries and what code was produced. And then also this, I mentioned the sort of sending, when you send something from one place to another, we're not sending the graph or the visual or the data, we're only sending the code across. So that's kind of the other component here. So, and that's basically it.
That's great, Colin. Can you just talk a little bit about how you guys think about model evaluation? You talked about, you went through a couple different models. We've seen people have, approaches and model libraries. Do you have 1,000 tests, a handful of tests, or how do you? Because you've done it a lot, and I suspect you're maybe doing it more in the future here. And you talked about you moved from Llama to Mistral.
So two things. There is a huge community of very sophisticated people. So leverage that, right? Hugging Face has a whole list of, here are the models, here's how they're performing. We don't have to go out and redo every test, right? It's like, or we don't have to check every model. You can always see who's the top of the league tables, who's getting the most traction. And when we see something that looks interesting, then we can pull that specific model. As you've probably noticed also, these models can kind of come and go too. So we always hash it and keep a copy of the model, because like if it disappears, we want to go back and like, wait, which version was that? How come that version went? We don't want to have to run into that issue. And then in testing, we do have essentially standardized tests that we run for our purposes, but then we will also, we add to it over time, and we just automate the process of running the tests every time we see a new model. Hey, let's spin it up, see how it works. If it's better, that's great. If not, that's okay. But it gives us a direction, right? We also, to the point about the randomness or hallucinations, we, if there's a test, like let's say it's the return the, show me all the buildings less with HVAC less than 60, we actually run that query multiple times. And because, you want to see how many times it was accurate because, like, was it consistent 10 out of 10 times, or was it like 3 out of 10 times, right? Anybody can get lucky once, right? So you want to we use that as a testing procedure too.
That's great. And Colin, I guess because you're going against structured data, there is ground truth here. So
Yeah.
I guess that's part of the reason you can also calibrate as well.
It's exactly that is exactly right. There's a gold standard. We already know the answers in advance for tests. So
wonderful. Well, Colin, just wonderful. So thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. We've got 10 minutes. This is kind of an open mic. People want to raise their hand and share something they've learned, or if they've gone to Grok and asked it to get roasted, or want to show what Gemini looks in Bard. I posted a video earlier today on what Grok and Bard with using Gemini Pro looks like, but I'm curious if others want to share anything, or anyone see any of the news changing, slowing down at all? Does anyone have views on the AI legislation proposals in Europe? Got a quiet crowd here tonight. Is anybody working on something?
Can I ask something, Paul, real quick? Is the Gemini stuff, how much of it was hype and how much of it was faked and how much of it was real? Do you have any idea?
I don't. I mean, it's just, I was telling Julio or someone earlier, I feel so bad for their engineers. I mean, this is the second absolute screw up they had on the marketing side. And this was right in the middle of a whole bunch of other announcements. And so the way I understand, there's 3 or 4 models. And if you have the personal and not the work, we have a personal email, you can then use it within that. I was able to search my mail, I was able to search YouTube, and it apparently is as good as GPT-4 and some standards, but I haven't had comprehensive testing on it. But my understanding is that the marketing screwed up a lot, but the Gemini 4 model is out, and that one has had some good tests.
Interesting. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, go ahead, Alex, then we'll go to Bob.
Yeah, I just wanted to let everybody know. I think it's also, I mean, everybody's talking about software and all that stuff here. I mean, definitely that's obviously the thing that's in our minds and what's coming up right now. But 5 years from now, we have to think about the next wave, which is going to be powered by AI, which is going to be robotics. And there's going to be a lot of companies that are going to put their hat in the ring, and that's Figure AI, Tesla, a couple of others, Boston Dynamics, that are going to drastically change the workforce again. So it's going to be very interesting to see that next wave, which I think is going to probably come in the next 4 to 5 years.
Change is not stopping. Thanks, Alex. Go ahead, Bob. Bob, you're on mute, I think.
So I just shared a document that came out today from Hugging Face. It's very technical, but I think most of this crowd can at least read the first section. The reason I raised this is that it's believed that GPT 4.0 and 4.0 Turbo, which has just slightly less than 2 trillion parameters, is actually made up of 16 experts, separate LLMs, each about 110 billion parameters. The reason I bring it up is Mistral just announced an 8x7 implementation. At the surface level, it's fixed 56 billion parameters. It's actually 47 get used anytime you inference it. The reason I bring it up is a mixture of experts is now going to get a lot of more publicity as a result of being exposed by Mistral. This is a great document. I will just post it, again, more technically oriented, but at least the intro I can do. I'll just post it in the chat, the link to it.
That's great. Thanks, Bob. Go ahead, Tim. Then we'll go to Colin.
Yep, I just, for fun, put Grok's roast of Elon Musk in the chat. So fun reading. If you want, I'm happy to read it aloud, but we want to get going, so I put it in the chat.
And so for people who don't know, when you go to Grok, it's within Twitter. They have a fun mode, which is irrelevant, more irrelevant, and in the regular mode. So that kind of personality, really even vulgar is a first, at least in my view, first major model really pushing on that.
Yes. So the first, I'll read the first sentence, which is, well, if it isn't the man who put the twit in Twitter. And it goes on from there.
Thank you, Tim. Go ahead, Colin.
I was just gonna say I thought the comment about, yeah, they're actually using multiple models is actually a very good point. And it is something in order to avoid retraining and tuning everything all the time. It's an approach we use too. So for the US Department of Defense, everything's in English, but for some countries we have they're in other languages, and it turns out the smaller models are not very good at lots of other the languages. So we actually say, okay, we have two models. One is the translation, take whatever the language is, translate it into English, and then send that English to the model, to the model we're using for this SQL query and for the graphing. And so that's that's I don't know if it's common, but it's something we found, which is the only way to kind of modularize that, so you don't have to keep upgrading both models or et cetera.
That's great. Thanks, Colin. RJ, last question or last comment.
Okay,
RJ.
well, just a fun story. Just a fun story. This is the first year I've made a generative AI Christmas card. I took the family house, and then I had generative AI make it in the snow in the dark. And then I used Adobe Firefly to do some generative fill with their generative fill brush. And I had it put in Santa's reindeer pulling his sled, and it turned out really good, and it wasn't that hard to do. So it was just wanted to share that.
Well, RJ, can you comfortable sharing? Do you have a picture of it ahead of you there? You can share it with the group.
Well, I gotta find it. Hold on a second.
And which image one did you use? Which image tool?
Well, I used a couple of image tools. I think I used oh darn, I can't remember the name of it because I did that one earlier. Sorry, I can't remember that one tool because I did that a couple of weeks ago. But it has a whole bunch of AI filters. Lunapic, LUNAPIC is, I think, the spelling. I like it because it has a whole bunch of cool, like, artistic tools you can use, and that's been available for a while. But then I took that after I made the daytime picture into nighttime and had it put in snowy kind of effect. Then I took that picture, uploaded it into Adobe Firefly, and I used the generative fill. And basically you just get this, the cursor, and you wave it across the top of the house. And in there, I put in a prompt and I said, put Santa Claus with the 7 reindeer. And it took some experimenting, but eventually it got it pretty good.
And RJ, are you a graphic artist at all? Could you have done
No, not at all.
So that's wonderful. So thanks so much for sharing, and thanks everyone for another really good meeting. And Colin, thanks again for sharing a fantastic use case.
My pleasure. Thanks. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
You too. Bye.